Hi everybody, welcome back to my channel. Here I am back at the pottery table and I am going to show you how to make one of these cylindrical forms. This is a picture that somebody made. We're going to add a handle to it. This has been bisque fired. For this project you will need a ruler, a rolling pin, a pin tool. I have here a wooden barbecue skewer, an armature form, and this is a Pringles container with some brown paper towel wrapped around it and taped in place. So I have this ready to go. I also have a string here that I will use to cut my clay. So after you have everything kind of out in front of you, you go ahead and you cut your clay. The first step is always wedging. So the surface that I have for wedging is just any normal surface, and then I have a canvas over my table, and I'm just going to quickly and carefully wedge my clay. It's important to wedge your clay every single time to make sure you don't have any air bubbles. After I wedge my clay, I'm going to roll it out into a slab that's about a 1/4 inch thick. Now, before I start rolling with my rolling pin, I'm going to use the heel of my hand to flatten the clay and make it as even as possible. And I kind of start in the middle and work my way out to the edge of the clay. So this piece of clay slab needs to be at least 10.5 inches on one side. So it seems pretty long, but really that's just the circumference of this armature form. I have my armature form covered with paper because I don't want the clay to stick to it, and it will remove very easily once it's been covered. So I am rolling out my slab here with my rolling pin, and I'm going to pick it up and flip it over a couple of times to make sure it doesn't get stuck to my surface. And this looks like it's pretty close to the length that I need, so I'm just going to go ahead and take my ruler and measure it, and it is perfectly, it's just where I need it to be. So it's actually a little bit longer, so I can trim off some of the edges with my pin tool to make a rectangle, which is the next step. So you want your rectangle to be nice and even. It doesn't really matter how tall the other sides of your rectangle are, so long as it's long enough to go around your entire armature. And then I am going to need some of this clay for the handle and the bottom of my cup. So I'm just going to go ahead and flatten it so that I can roll it out. And then here is my rectangle. And I can tell this end is a little bit thinner than this end. So I'm actually going to just take my rolling pin and even it out. And again, I'm not pressing too firmly on my clay because I don't want it to get stuck to the work surface. And now I'm going to go ahead and roll out the bottom and set that aside for later. When I trace the bottom, I will want the clay to already be wrapped around the circumference of my armature because it will add a little bit of thickness, and that just depends on how thick your slab is. relatively, they're all going to be a little bit different. So I'm taking my armature and I'm just going to roll the slab around it. And then when I get to the point where it starts to overlap, I'm going to take my pin tool and just go ahead and scratch the surface a little bit. Now in the previous video where we made the lizard, we kind of experimented with how much pressure it takes to scratch the surface versus cut the surface. And at this point, we don't want to cut the surface. We just want to scratch it. Now you take your slip and put a little bit of slip on your finger and just kind of cover the spots in the clay where you made the scratches. And we are going to scratch to attach. And then once we got that done, we can just sort of press it into place. So here we are, just pressing the seam, and we want to make it nice and even. And now you'll see that you've added a little bit of thickness to your bottom surface. And so we'll take our bottom slab and roll it nice and even, and we'll trace the slab around just so it's a little tiny bit thicker than it needs to be. And you can go ahead and cut that out. And now, so it's important that the slab around the armature is really even at the bottom. And you're going to scratch and attach all of these surfaces as well. And so you do both sides of the surface you want to attach. So you do the edge of the bottom there, and then around the bottom slab here. And then you just take a little bit of slip on your finger and apply it to the surface where you scratched. And you do that on both the bottom of the cylinder and the rounded edge of the clay circle. And then you just press a little bit firmly so that it connects, and then you can use your fingers to kind of pinch it together. Like this. And I'm just trying to do my best to make sure that this surface seam is nice and smooth. And then the sooner you can take your clay off of the armature form, the better, because it does shrink a little bit as it dries and creates a suction that will make it difficult to remove later. So at this point, I'm just going to carefully slip the armature out of the paper. And this is why it's really important that you don't tape your paper to the armature. You just want to tape the paper to itself. Otherwise, it will get stuck, and then it comes right out. And you have this nice little cup form. And then I'm going to take a little bit more slip on my finger and just kind of like smooth this seam. And the last step is to make the handle. So that's pretty easy. I'm just going to kind of roll the slab that I already have nice and flat again, and use my ruler just to make a flat strip of clay. It can be as thick or as thin as you want it to be. Just a little bit. But again, I'm going to make sure that the edges are nice and smooth. So in order to do that, I put a little bit of water on my finger and just smooth out the edges. If you don't do this now, once it bisques, it will be a little bit sharp. All right, so at this point, I'm just going to make a couple of marks on my cylinder form where I want the handle to attach. I'm just going to play with it a little bit. So I'm just going to scratch to attach up here and scratch to attach down here. And add a little bit of slip again in both of the spots. And I'm also going to scratch to attach on the handle in both spots. And then you just kind of press it into place at the top and at the bottom. And if the clay is firm enough, you can kind of play with the shape of the handle a little bit. And that's it. That is a hand-built slab mug. If you have extra time, you can use cookie cutters to add shapes. On this one, my friend traced the shapes of the cookie cutters when the slab was still flat and added little shooting star kind of designs. Pretty cool. Alright, well, thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.